Good evening. Hey, have we got fun for you tonight? My good friend Duggan Flanakin with the Committee for Constructive Tomorrow is going to join us to talk about the EPA's totalitarian assault on America, what the federal EPA under President Biden is doing that is just simply going to shock you. Before we get into that, let me just remind you of the Cornwall Alliance for the Stewardship of Creation, who we are, what we do. We are a network of roughly 70 evangelical Christian scholars, natural scientists, economists, theologians, and philosophers, and the like, working together to educate public and policymakers on three things, simultaneously and interwoven: biblical earth stewardship, or what it means to exercise godly dominion over the earth, according to Genesis 1:28, and economic development for the very poor around the world, that is through the social institutions of private property rights, entrepreneurship, limited government, free trade, and the rule of law, and the gospel of Jesus Christ, the good news that sinners like me can be reconciled to the holy God by God's grace alone, through faith alone, in the Lord and Savior Jesus Christ alone, who on the cross bore our sins and in the resurrection was declared righteous in all that he had done, so that his sacrifice for us is effective and satisfactory, so that we can be forgiven of our sins and declared righteous in God's sight because of our substitute, the Lord Jesus Christ. To put it another way, the Cornwall Alliance is trying to save the planet from the people who are trying to save the planet. I would invite you to go to cornwallalliance.org on the web and learn much more about us. We have lots of educational articles and books and DVDs in our online store. You can keep up with a lot of different subjects there. So thank you again for joining us tonight. One last reminder before we bring Duggan on, and that is that every month we at the Cornwall Alliance offer, as our thanks when people make a donation of literally any size, a book or a booklet or a study of some sort. This month our offer is Climate Change, A Convenient Truth by my friend Jim Hollingsworth. We'd call him a polymath scientist, a man of broad learning in many different fields of science. And this wonderful book has 48 brief chapters, typically 2 or 3 pages apiece, written in very clear language so that it's understandable for anybody with, say, a 10th grade education. The cool thing about this is that you can go to chapters and quickly learn the answers to a variety of different questions, different controversies related to climate change. To request your copy, simply go to cornwallalliance.org and then click on the donate button. And as you fill out the donation form, when you come to the comments field, just write in promo code 21-06. That's promo code 21-06. Or you can write in the book title, Climate Change, A Convenient Truth. And be sure to include A Convenient Truth, because we have some other resources titled Climate Change as well. So we want to be sure that we know exactly what it is you're requesting. I hope that you'll invite your friends to join you on this program. And you might also, if they're not able to join you tonight, tell them that they can see the program on Facebook, on our Facebook page anytime after this, or they can see it on our YouTube channel, Cornwall Alliance for the Stewardship of Creation, on YouTube, where not only this, but all of our past From the Stacks programs are archived there, as well as on Facebook, and where we also have a large number of other educational videos, long and short. So there we have our introduction. Thanks again for joining us tonight. Now let's bring on our friend Duggan Flanakin. Duggan is a poet, a philosopher, a former hippie. In fact, one of the earliest hippie types who was heavily involved in the early hippie movement, the radical movement, knew some of the Weather Underground folks who started off the Weather Underground, and he has a checkered past, we might say. But the Lord graciously saved this man, brought him to faith in Christ, gave him a marvelous life after that, and he's used him in some really, really spectacular ways. Duggan, thank you very much for joining us tonight. Um, tell us a little bit about your own past, your background, what it is that has enabled you to address the kinds of things that you do with the Committee for a Constructive Tomorrow.
Well, good afternoon and good evening, depending on what time of the day you're watching this. I will only say to start with that I did indeed graduate from college in the 1960s. I went to Washington, D.C. and got a job working for the Bureau of Mines, which is an agency that no longer exists. It was our hard science agency. We did research of every imaginable science. And so in the process, I worked with scientists on their writing skill, on how to present their findings of their research and all that. So I got an incredible science education after getting a history degree with a science background, minor, and so I got to doing all that. And in the meantime, there was a war going on, and I was sort of against the war, especially considering the fact that I just didn't see that it was benefiting our country. And so I got involved against the war, and I got to know a lot of the people, especially a lot of the people in the hard new left. I mean, Bernardine Dorn was a personal, acquaintance of mine, and I will say that I tried to show them that no, the way of love was a much better way, and they didn't like that plan. In fact, hate was the driving force behind the new left, and guess what? They're running the country now. So hate apparently has given them a lot of power. But again, hate is a temporary thing. It fades out. It has no power behind it. It runs out of steam because love conquers all. So we remember as we face these daily travails, that love is going to eventually bring us to victory. And all we have to do is keep the love in our hearts and not be haters that they are. We can be sad about what they're doing. We can point out the error of their ways, but we ourselves have to stay focused on our energy being right, because how are people going to hear the truth if we're barking at them? It doesn't work that way. So I got involved, and in the process after that, I had a radical life change. In fact, speaking of hippies, it was one of the most famous hippies of them all, Wayne Rogers, Turkey from the movie Woodstock, who led me to Jesus Christ on a December night in 1972. Turns out my daughter, whose mother I was separated from at the time, gave birth to my oldest daughter that very night. So it was a double win, two births at one time. And so because of that background, again, I come at many things from a different perspective. I also grew up in a very small town in the deep South, and it was a paper mill town. So I learned a bit of important it is for people in small towns and in rural America to have a job, to have a way to make a living, to have prosperity. Then we come in and we see the intentional destruction of rural America, by successive administrations through giving our jobs away to countries, just so we could buy a cheaper knockoff product. We won't mention the countries, but you know where we're coming from, where they're talking about. And so the EPA came out of that movement in the 1960s and 70s. Earthy Gaylord Nelson, Richard Nixon created the EPA, and I was there. I was there when Ruckelshaus was sworn in. I was there for the first NEPA, National Environmental Policy Act, course to learn how they need to enforce their consolidated agency. Because they sort of pulled a little bit from the Bureau of Mines. They pulled from different agencies to create this one powerful organization, the EPA, which these days nobody, as are most bureaucracies you know, so-called so-called executive branch agencies, but the executive branch has very little control over them. If the executive branch is opposed to their agenda, and they have an agenda of their own. And this is the thing that we have to understand. And the people in the government have an agenda that is not the agenda of the American people. It is their agenda, and they expect us to
Yeah.
conform to their agenda. And that is
All too
the
often that
problem we
is
have
the
is we do
case.
not have, we cannot hold these people to accountability. And
Yeah.
so 20 years
Duggan,
ago, well, more than that, 23 years ago, I met David Rothbard, Craig Rucker from CFAC, while I was a senior fellow with the Texas Public Policy Foundation. And in that time, I met them, and eventually they asked me to write a paper for them. So I wrote a paper called EPA versus the states, top-down commander or managing partner. The idea I had was that if we were going to have a federal environmental coordinating agency, they should be a facility because all policy should be as close to local as possible. And instead, what we have is a centralized authority, creating an agenda to aggrandize its own power and to increase its numbers. If you see that the EPA is like all other federal agencies, has grown in numbers and budget over the years. And the reason for that is they continue to find to regulate, new things to regulate. So they regulated clean air, they regulated clean water. We got our clean air. Our air is beautifully clean in most places. And the water, we haven't done enough on. That's another story. But then they decided, well, we have to regulate something else. And they came up with carbon dioxide. And dioxide is not a pollutant, even though our Supreme Court, listening to the EPA so-called scientists, agreed with the EPA that carbon dioxide is a pollutant, which means every time we exhale, we're polluting the earth, I guess.
yeah,
Uh,
yeah.
take,
To call carbon dioxide a
yes.
pollutant is really stretching pretty hard, since after all, it is absolutely essential to all of life. Plants can't grow without it, and if plants don't grow, well, animals don't grow either because they have to eat plants. Yeah, CO2 is truly the elixir of life, and I've appreciated the work that you've done over the years, Duggan, to help people understand that. Um, Give us quickly just a little bit of background about CFACT, about the Committee for a Constructive Tomorrow. I knew David Rothbard before he died a few years ago. Knew Craig Rucker, have known them both since about 1990, I guess it was, and really appreciated them as men of God, committed to truth, committed to serving the poor in America and around the world, committed to the rule of law rather than the rule of men. And so I've appreciated that very much about them. But tell us more about CFACT, about what it does, why it does it, where people can learn more about it.
Well, to start off with, it's cfact.org. Good website. You'll find my articles there, so therefore you know it's a great website. You'll also find some articles by a whole lot of other guys who are a lot smarter than me. But I will say that CFAC started when Dave and Craig were young guys, and they were looking at these colleges, and they were taking these student funds, the student fee funds, and they were giving left-wing organizations to indoctrinate, to give them money to indoctrinate students into left-wing and ideologies, Ralph Nader stuff. And so Ralph Nader screwed money, and he said, well, "Wait a minute, students shouldn't be giving money that's supposed to be for their activities, and all going in one direction." And so they said, well, let's just cancel the things out. Well, the problem was they found it easier to create collegiate chapters and start getting some of that money. It was easier to do that than it was to shut down the money train in some places. And so we began to create chapters. CFACT was again, it was out there, and for time, they began to get more more challenges, more options, more opportunities to do more work. And over time, these young guys who were in their 20s grew into men in their 40s. And by this time, we had been taking over and went out to the Kyoto for the Kyoto Protocol and fought against that successfully, I might add. And the CFAC has been going to the UN climate conferences since they started. We were in Rio, we were in Johannesburg. Wherever they go, they create havoc. They embarrass the left because they bring truth and rational thought into these meetings. So that's one of the big things that CFAC has done over the years, is be a watchdog against the UN. I have never been to those conferences because I, had other things to do. But I have been to many conferences in this country, and I've been to Cancun, I've been to Mexico with CFAC, and the work we've done directly with people there is part of our mission. It's part of our mission because we have to learn from people what their needs are in order to advocate for the people. We're not the kind of these leftist organizations that tell the people what they should think, what they should demand. And so today in Africa, the world leaders have decided that Africa, like the rest of us, should decarbonize. The Africans, on the other hand, are just beginning to discover that, the breadth and depth of their oil and gas resources, and they want to exploit them because they would like to actually have, electricity, highways, hospitals, schools, things that we take for granted. They would like to be able to build those things for themselves and use the revenues they get from oil and gas operations and other minerals exploration and things like that to pay for those things. But the West doesn't want them to happen. So that's what's happening in Africa. And so our boys in Africa came up with an idea that when the UN decided to move Africa Oil Week, for example, to Dubai, which is not in Africa, in case anybody doesn't know their geography, they moved it out of Africa. The African Energy Chamber, my buddy NJ Uyuk, decided to create an entire new event called Africa Energy Week. Africa Energy Week has now become the premier event of the year for energy in Africa, and it's happening the very same week, the very same days that the Africa Oil Week is happening outside of Africa in Dubai. And many of the African countries who were originally going to be part of Africa Oil Week are already going to Africa Energy Week. So we begin to see that Africans are standing up and saying, we don't need your top-down regulation of us. It is good that they're doing that. American people should be standing up to these top-down organizations in this country saying, we don't agree with your ideas how we should live.
Yeah, it's great that they're doing that.
Take back our country, take back regulatory agencies.
Yeah, frankly, the folks in the West who are pushing for climate control, for fighting global warming, what they want to do in depriving Africans of the use of fossil fuels is to trap them in severe poverty for generations to come. And that's just simply flat out immoral. Some of our listeners might notice that the sound is breaking up a bit when Duggan is speaking. That's because he has to be using his cell phone for this program. He doesn't have a good internet connection where he is. But we'd ask you to be a little patient. As I've listened, I've found that though you'll hear a little bit of breakup from time to time, you can pretty much catch everything that he's saying. And so I'd ask you to hang with him. He's a wise man. Well, I actually invited him onto the program tonight because he wrote an article not too long ago called EPA's Totalitarian Assault on America. And I wanted to talk about that a little bit. It begins by saying Biden-Harris Environmental Protection Agency Administrator Michael Regan, that's Regan, R-E-G-A-N, not Reagan, R-E-A-G-A-N. Too bad we couldn't have a real Reagan in the EPA. But Michael Regan is clearly on a mission. He has bold aspirations and a long to-do list, says the Washington Post. But to succeed, the Post acknowledges, Regan must help the EPA get its groove back. Duggan, what in the world?
Yes.
What in the world does that mean? What is did the EPA lose its groove under the former administration, the Trump administration? What
Well,
do they
happened?
what do they want to get back?
Excuse me. What happened EP was Donald Trump basically reined it in. Donald Trump reined in the EPA. As I said, they have gone from rational, reasoned regulation to just power mongering. I mean, the difference between 70 parts per million and 60 parts per million for ozone may not sound much to anybody, but it basically takes you below background. And so they write the regulations in such a way that you cannot possibly abide by them. And then they can fine you and punish you and take over your business and take over your state regulatory agency and push you around. So you see, they use the power of their own regulatory writing to take away our power. You'll notice how much land the federal government controls, much of which it should be back in the control of the states, maybe available for people to go live on it. But no, the federal government prefers to keep that land for itself and its friends who get to go on little excursions that we don't get to. They go into wilderness areas where we're not allowed,
You mentioned the ozone issue later on in your article, and I want us to get to that because I think it's quite crucial for understanding the mentality of the current EPA leadership. But let's just walk through this a bit at a time. I'm just going to ask you about the various things that you said here. You write that Regan says his job is, quote, to restore the scientific integrity and the utilization of data, of facts. Now, why does this need restoring? What happened under the Trump administration to get us away from scientific integrity and the use of data and facts?
Well, this is where we get to understanding that science to the progressive means that men can have babies. Is that science or is that politics? I've never seen the male organ as a birthing canal, but that's another story. But what I'm saying there is their definition of science is what we want to accomplish. We will call science. We all know that, of course, if we, the great Paul Ehrlich, the population bomb has already hit and we're all dead. So this is an imaginary dream we're having. Happens in the future. It didn't happen because we're all dead, because Paul Ehrlich said we're all going to die, except we didn't die. And there's so many of these great predictions, doom and gloom, that are far from the truth. So basically, we're living in a tabloid world, where tabloid journalism has become the science of the day. I mean,
okay, and
there's just so many other examples of this we could go into, but I'll just leave it with this. They declare carbon dioxide a pollutant for the sole purpose of shutting down the oil and gas industry and the coal industry, because they had already regulated every other conceivable pollutant that those industries put out when they're burning coal or burning oil or anything, and they've regulated them all to the point that there's no more regulation they can do with the actual pollutants that they create, like the sulfur dioxide or the carbon monoxide. And so when they got rid of those things, it's a matter of enforcement. Of course, if your catalytic converter isn't working, you're going to be putting some carbon monoxide out into the atmosphere, and that is a pollutant. Carbon monoxide and what people die from when they sit in the garage and turn the engine on. But carbon dioxide is not. So we see that they manipulate science, but we've seen this all the way back in biblical days, and you've seen it And my favorite example is Elijah and the prophets of Baal, when the lying scientists of the day, otherwise known as prophets in those days, said, "Oh, we'll make it rain." And today they're trying to seed the clouds. Was it Bill Gates supposed to cover the earth, you know, darken the sun and all this stuff? These are dangerous
Yeah.
ideas. They have no idea the impact of what they could be doing. It's like introducing invasive species into an ecosystem. You don't know what damage they can do, but you see the
Yeah,
damage
I
later, and it's too
understand.
late to. It's how do you get rid of the
Yeah,
kudzu?
Gates is funding an effort
So
by some
we allow them
Scandinavians
to introduce these
to
dangerous things.
okay, Gates is funding an effort by some Scandinavians to put aerosols, fine particles, actually of chalk, high up in the stratosphere to block some sunlight in order to cool the Earth. The problem is, of course, we don't know in advance what that's going to do, and it's it's a tremendously dangerous experiment and something that ought not to be just in the hands of a mega billionaire who thinks he is the savior of the world. The world has only one savior, and that is Jesus Christ. To go back to this notion that Regan says that the Biden EPA needs to restore the scientific integrity and the utilization of data, of facts. He said that the EPA is committed to building on the values of transparency, respect, and open dialogue. And then he said that the EPA wants to get away from what he's calling secret science. And yet, as I understand it, Duggan, the opposite is what's actually going on. We had a lot of secret science behind the EPA under the Obama administration. In fact, going back long before that, clear back into the 1980s, the EPA has often used scientific studies, the raw data for which and the computer code for which were not available to the public. But one of the fundamental values of science is replicability. If, if your work is truly scientific, if it's quality stuff, then other scientists with access to the same data, the same code, should be able to replicate it. But if you don't have access to the same data and code, there's no way to test and see whether the conclusions of your science are right. Now, running from the 80s right up through the end of the Obama administration in the end of 2016, early 2017, we had this secret science being used all the time by the EPA. The Trump administration, under EPA Administrator Andrew Wheeler, said that the secret science that was going on just had to stop. And so under his administration, the EPA adopted a new rule. Now, that rule required that the EPA give preference to scientific studies whose data and code were open to the public so that other scientists could test it. Um, and and this actually was to stop the use of secret science. But he didn't, in passing that rule, say that the EPA could never have reference to anything else. He simply said that the public science, the science with publicly available data and code, had to take precedence. So, what is it that Michael Regan, the new administrator at the EPA, what is he so upset about, and what kind of a change has he made to the EPA's rules about the kind of science that are going to inform policy?
Well, we know that many of the EPA careerists are actually environmental activists, which means they're socialist activists. They are steeped in the idea that government could control business. Government, it's not so much that business can operate well, it's the fact that they have to operate under their control. So it's a matter of who's in charge. Uh, take for the particulate matter, where we now see the Biden administration is trying to reimpose these new, tougher standards for fine particulate matter on the public. Now, we know that their original studies that they used were based on faulty science. In fact, we know this because they also used human testing and on people and didn't tell them. So they were telling the public that this was deadly, that people were going to die if they were exposed to fine particulate matter. But in the studies, they told people, we need to subject you to high levels of fine particulate matter for our scientific research. They didn't tell them that they were going to die. And in fact, nobody did die because, as it turns out, it isn't that much of a problem. But because EPA had tried to suppress the truth of the science, people didn't have that information. It took years of hard work to uncover the truth in this, and finally, through lawsuits, that all got changed. And some benefits were, and so we began to realize you can't trust these bureaucrats to tell you that what they're hiding from us is really true.
Yeah, that I think is one of the most scandalous things,
because it's all a matter of power.
The EPA has done is to run those experiments with fine particulate matter. PM 2.5 is the technical term for it, and they, the EPA administrator at the time, I believe that was Lisa Jackson, had said publicly that there was no safe level of PM 2.5, that in fact just the tiniest bit of it would kill people, and yet they went and did these experiments. Now, the what's called the Nuremberg Code about medical experimentation on humans forbids doing that very thing. It requires that those who volunteer for such experiments must be told the risks that they face in advance, and it also requires that the experiments cannot be done on anybody, whether he volunteers or not, unless the experiment actually offers some hope to cure that volunteer, that experimental person, of some sort of disease. And so actually the EPA was violating the Nuremberg Code, and it's just a shameful thing. You've written about that. I'm not sure whether you have or somebody else at CFACT has written about that. And so anybody who just simply did a web search for Nuremberg Code and then restricted the search to cfact.org would be able to find those articles. There's a great book.
I think they were able
called
to, yes.
Scare Pollution by Steve Malloy of junkscience.com, in which Malloy shows the solid proof that PM 2.5, this very, very fine particulate matter, constitutes no health risk whatsoever. And yet the EPA has used it as a rationale for imposing draconian restrictions on, excuse me, on industry and on vehicular travel and so on, that are extremely costly to the US economy, that actually harm people instead of helping people. His book, I just said the title, Steve Malloy's Scare Pollution, is available through the Cornwall Alliance's online store. Just go to cornwallalliance.org/shop, and you can order Steve Malloy's book from there. It's a great read. I want to remind everyone now that we are offering, as our way of saying thank you when someone makes a donation of literally any size, the book Climate Change: A Convenient Truth by Jim Hollingsworth. This is a wonderful book, 48 very short, simple chapters that you can use to answer all sorts of arguments about climate change, and to show people that while human-induced climate change is real, it is not dangerous. It is certainly not catastrophic. It's not an existential threat, as the Biden administration claims. Instead, It's basically something that we should welcome. It results in warmer winters without resulting in hotter summers. It raises temperatures primarily toward the poles in the winter and at night, not toward the equator in the summer and in the daytime. So it raises low temperatures without raising high temperatures. That's great because it lengthens growing seasons. It reduces cold snaps, which kill 20 times as many people per day as do heat waves. And it makes plants grow better all over the world, not only because of the warmer winters and the earlier springs, the later falls, the earlier the last killing freeze occurs earlier in the spring. The first killing freeze occurs later in the fall. This all is good for plant growth all over the world. Not only that, but also, of course, the added carbon dioxide in the atmosphere makes all plants grow better. So, to request your copy of Climate Change, A Convenient Truth, just go to cornwallalliance.org, click on the donate button, and as you fill out the donation form, in the comments field, write in promo code 21-06 or the title, Climate Change, A Convenient Truth, the whole title, because we have some other resources that start with that climate change main title. And you will receive your free copy, and 100% of your gift will be tax deductible. But I'd encourage you to act quickly. We're coming close to the end of the month now, and our supply will tend to run short as we get to the end of the month. Once we're out, we're out. Sorry to say. All right, so back to your article, Duggan. One of the things that you pointed out is that opponents to the secret science rule under the Trump administration said that it would the use of critical public health studies kept secret, supposedly to protect the identities of trial participants. And you said that's not the case. Now, what we're trying to do is to protect people's medical privacy right here, right? And so the charge, the argument by Michael Regan and others who opposed the Trump era secret science rule banning the use of or discounting the use of secret science was that this would make public the health records of people who were involved in various different scientific studies. Is that
Oh, you
true?
mean like a vaccine passport will do?
Right.
I mean, talk about invasion of medical privacy. A vaccine passport is a clear invasion of medical privacy.
Yeah. But did the Trump rule expose people to the violation of their medical privacy?
No, it did not. It would not. The data would be, are not. You're not releasing the names of the people. You're releasing the data. Now, these studies are rather large. I guess it's quite possible a super hacker, and I was super motivated to go and look for some individual super important data that by this time are 20 or 30 or 40 old, in many cases, because these studies are done and then years later the research is published. They're not doing, it's not like a live poll of your voting preference. These are studies done over time. And so if you really, really, dedicated, you might be able to crack it. But on the other hand, you can do that anyhow. I mean, if you want a hacker to go find someone's medical data, you just get a judge to open it up. I mean, we know how, for example, Barack Obama won the Senate race by getting a judge to break open a sealed divorce decree. So are your medical records safe? Are your divorce decree records safe? Is anything safe from a government that's so pervasive and is able to capture every move you make and record it? And so right now, I would say that that's a bogus issue.
Yeah. Another part of your article.
The ordinary people are not going to go do this, and it would be gauche.
Yeah. Another part of your article, you go on to say that the Biden-Harris EPA now has revived its old policy based on a failed 2015, that is Obama-Biden administration, rulemaking that twists the Clean Air Act language in an effort to destroy auto racing as a sport in the USA. Huh? What?
Well, yes. I mean, they don't want these, cars to be able to get souped up, and still be allowed to be on the highway. Not that they're going to drive them on the highway; they're being towed on the highway. There's a big difference, you see. They're not driving on the highway, but they're not allowing to be towed on the highway. Things like that.
So
They've come up with these rules because, again, when you're a regulator and all you can sit around and do all day long is think about where else can I squeeze these people? I've got to keep my job. I've got to have something to do. I mean, if everybody's in compliance, I'm out of a job. It's like a doctor. If he heals all his patients, he's out of work.
So here's what the race guys need to do. Okay, the auto racers, instead of towing their race cars from racetrack to racetrack down the highway on the back of a tow truck, right? Instead of doing that, they need to put them in air transport planes and fly them from event to event. That ought to please the EPA because it'll put a whole lot more pollutants in the atmosphere.
No, it really doesn't, because the bottom line is they don't want them on the track, period. They want to kill the sport because auto racing, I mean, let's put it this way. There is no noise in an electric car. The entire sport of auto racing is all about the sound. Have you ever been to an auto race? You know what I'm talking about. You want to hear the noise. You want to hear the roar of the engine. That's why people go.
But
they go
Duggan,
because sound is part of what the sport is all about.
That's fun, though. You can't allow fun
without sound.
Yeah, the
fun is illegal.
Of the EPA is to keep people from having fun. Don't you understand?
Well, all right, let's shut you out of the national parks and forests.
Yeah, let's move on to another part of your article here. A recent Wall Street Journal editorial says that the Biden-Harris EPA has a secret plan to force massive CO2 emissions reductions under the Clean Air Act using ozone as its vehicle of choice. You brought this up briefly early on in the program tonight. I said that we would get back to it. Here we are. We're back to it. How does this work? What is the EPA doing to use ozone as a way to cut CO2 emissions?
Well, it's kind of like the way they're doing, with carbon dioxide in general. The idea is to create a regulation that in order to win, remember, to get to 1.5 degrees C, we have to, according to the IEA, according to the International Energy Agency, the International Energy Agency says we have to shut down all fossil fuel exploration, development, and use. We have to using all cars right away. If we don't, it's not going to happen. We're all going to die, except, of course, if we're in Russia or India or wherever, But, so what they do, they say, okay, background ozone, level ozone, it comes from trees, it comes from all kinds of, wherever there's greenery, as well as wherever there's, people burning fossil fuels. We have background levels in places like Houston that are higher than the levels that they want to set for ozone. I mean, you have to cut down all the trees in the big thicket to satisfy the EPA. So they create these rules that are draconian and impossible to achieve without drastic changes to the way we live. And they make these numbers up out of whole cloth because they come up with these 1 in a million or 1 in 10 million numbers And if we could save one life out of a million, well, gee whiz, you know, we better, if we can't do that, we have to shut down everything. Their mentality is,
yeah.
it has nothing
Duggan,
to do with risk. It has to do
it
with
seems
power.
it seems so obviously absurd for them to set a maximum ozone level that is above the natural background level. How do they defend this? It just seems so obvious.
Well, it's very simple. We are the government, and you will do what we say. That's the way they defend.
No.
I mean,
Okay.
one thing you have to remember about government: the purpose of government is to enrich the governing class.
Yeah.
That's the purpose of government. They have to. They live off. They're parasites. They live off the money that we and you make, but in order to justify their existence, they have to create more work for themselves.
All right. Now, you also cite a 2017 study from Harvard's T.C. Chan School of Public Health. You point out that the EPA based its ozone rule on this study, and that the study claims that there is no safe level of ozone in the atmosphere. Now, we've just talked about the simple fact that, look, there's natural background ozone in the atmosphere. It is in many places above the maximum level permitted by the EPA. Kind of strange that the EPA would be saying, you can't have ozone above this level when nature does. I mean, it reminds me of the king who went and commanded the tide to stop. It's just absurd. But what I want to focus on here, Duggan, is the use of the word safe. When this Harvard study says that there is no safe level of ozone in the atmosphere, is safe really a proper term in science? Doesn't that term presuppose some moral values? And what should scientists speak on?
Well, let's start with the fact that T.C. Chan, who funded the Harvard School and got his name attached to it, is a Hong Kong businessman with ties to the mainland, China. And so, what I'm saying is there's money that influences what these reports. And so if it's to the advantage of an organization or a country to influence our policies in a way that benefits them and hurts our economy, they're going to find a way to do it.
Here's what I want
throughout
you to address.
This country, people sent back to China and people sent back to other countries for spying and for stealing secrets.
Here's what I want you to address here.
We don't need to necessarily just take what the government, what a Harvard or anybody says as gospel. Safe.
Okay. Here's what I want you to address.
Safe is, the umpire says, if you beat the throw to first base.
Right.
Meaning by that, safe
That's
is
the issue.
In the eyes of of the visionary. So they may say safe is not what we would say safe is.
Yeah, my point is that safe is not really a proper term in scientific discourse, because safe is a conclusion that you reach as a part of a moral value sort of thing, whereas science is supposed to be just simply physical fact, right? Empirical fact. And so if the study had said, okay, at such and such an ozone level, the risks and benefits ratio is so and so, that would be scientific. But to say that there's no safe level or that any given level is safe, that's really an abuse of science. It's not properly scientific. Okay, we're just about out of time here. And so I want to wrap up by moving to something right close to the end of your article here. You state that democratic attorney generals around the country and green groups and top Biden environmental regulators intend to impose the Green New Deal on states through backdoor regulations. Can you give me a few examples of the backdoor regulations that would be used to impose these? And be aware,
Well,
you need to
let's
stay within just
start with
about 2 minutes.
the mandate that we stop selling fossil fuel cars. That's one way to impose the Green New Deal. If you're not, and not only that, basically shutting down. I mean, they're draconian plans, and I can't imagine them actually getting away with this. Include phasing out gasoline stations, making it harder to buy gasoline, raising the price of gasoline. A backdoor. You want to do this? How about, oh, you'll have to shut down oil and gas development in this country, and stop the pipelines and create some shortages, raise the price of gasoline to $7, $8 a gallon, and people will be more interested in buying an electric car. You know, and I might point out that as I've written about many times, when they built these wind turbines, they didn't do the same kind of environmental assessments that they do for every other industry. They built these offshore wind things. Don't have the answers yet. They don't even know what they have. They're violating their whole rules, just to do these things because they're so good for the planet, So
Yeah,
they skirt the truth. They skirt the principles, that they claim are so important, are thrown out the window. I mean, you can kill a whole lot of bats and birds with a wind farm, but if one bird falls into an oil pit, you're going to get fined $500,000.
Yeah. So what they do is they favor particular types of energy over against fossil fuels.
And that is bad public policy. Bad public policy.
Yep. Duggan concludes his article by writing, giving unelected bureaucrats and a like-minded political cabal effective and arbitrary control over the entire U.S. economy creates a dictatorship of faceless and nameless totalitarians whose diktats the political class can claim they are powerless to upend. This is where America is headed unless we stop these power-crazed autocrats. Thus, from my good friend Duggan Flanakin. Thank you so much, Duggan, for joining us on the program tonight. And folks, I will remind you once more,
their lives.
Yep. I will remind you once more that as our way of saying thanks, when you make a donation of literally any size, doesn't matter how small, to the Cornwall Alliance and ask for it, we will be glad to send you free the book Climate Change, A Convenient Truth by Jim Hollingsworth. This is a great resource, very clear, short chapters that answer all sorts of different arguments about dangerous man-made global warming. And it's something that you can give to young people to read. Anybody with, say, a 10th grade education or above can understand it. It's something that I would love to see in many, many people's hands. So if you would like to have your copy of it free, all we ask you to do is to go to cornwallalliance.org, click on the donate button, and then as you fill out the donation form, when you come to the comments field, write in promo code 21-06. That's promo code 21-06. Or the full title, Climate Change, A Convenient Truth. And we will send you your free copy, and 100% of your donation will be tax deductible. Next week on From the Stacks, we will have my good friend John Hodges, the director of the Center for Western Studies, back on with us. We started our conversation about the preservation of Western civilization and the fine values that have defined it for a couple of thousand years, especially for the last 1,000 years, and especially the last 250 or so years here in the United States. And we're going to continue that conversation that we began back a few weeks ago. So join us next Tuesday for John Hodges of the Center for Western Studies as we continue with From the Stacks, which, by the way, takes its title from the fact that here I am sitting in front of a little bit of my library, and librarians call bookcases stacks. That's where it comes from, in case you were curious. Thanks again. God bless.